Good morning. What a privilege to be here at Memorial Church on this beautiful Saturday morning. It's a privilege to be here because I know that as I stand here in front of me, I have diligent students of the Word. Some of you have studied the Word for many, many years. And for some of you, the book of Hebrews has been a special book. This is why I have two roving mics with the permission of the deacons and the pastor. And at any time, if you feel that you would like to say something, you would like to contribute, or even if you like to correct me, please feel free to do so. I am privileged also because in this congregation today are many of my colleagues with whom I work at Avondale. It is good to see familiar faces, friends. It's good to see colleagues in the congregation. Hopefully I won't say something that will embarrass you too much. Among the colleagues that I have are Pastor Neem and Pastor Stephen. And I would like to say, Pastor Neem and Pastor Stephen, thank you for inviting me. Hopefully I won't say something that makes it the last time you invite me. In this congregation this morning, I also have friends who have now become family. And it's so beautiful to see them here this morning. Friends with whom I do life together, with whom I eat, I laugh, and I laugh so much that I end up crying. So it's good to see them in the congregation today, and it's a real privilege to be here. One of those, Dr. Cale Duval, will be your preacher next week, and it's an honor for us to be here this morning. I must say, I was really touched by the song of Elio. Elio happens to be one of my countrymen. Please don't hold that against me. But Elio is a very good friend and a special friend. I think he's got a voice of angels. And to sing this song, You Raise Me Up Today, is so special. So thank you very much. You are gifted. You have a great talent. And thank you that you use it for the grace of God. Your series this month is an approachable God. And I think as different preachers, your pastors, have gone through this series, you've realized that God is one of us. He wants to be one of us. He wants to dwell among us. He is Emmanuel, God with us. Today I have the task of going through the book of Hebrews with you. And William Lane did say that the book of Hebrews is for one who loves puzzles. And the question about puzzles is always, how much time do you have? Now let me assure you, I don't intend going beyond 12 o'clock. I can promise you that. And even if I have not finished my sermon and I see 12 o'clock, I will say amen. And I will go home. So I'm not planning to go beyond 12 o'clock. But because the book of Hebrews is like a puzzle that you have to put together, it is important for us to know that we will just be looking and having an overview of the book of Hebrews, touching on some points without being able to touch on every point in the book of Hebrews. The first point, and probably the most important point coming to the book of Hebrews, is what was the situation of the Christians when they got the book of Hebrews. The first intended audience of the book of Hebrews, what was their situation? And to summarize their situation, I want to do two things. Firstly, just ask you a couple of questions. Secondly, tell you a little story. The first questions that I want to ask are, what happens when you need Jesus? And while Jesus is near, he seems so far away. What happens when you need Jesus more and he wants to bear your burden, but it seems that you are bearing your burdens alone? What happens when you need Jesus and Jesus is giving you the answer, but it seems that his answer is so far away? That was the situation of the early Christians living in Rome. That was the situation of the early Christians receiving the book of Hebrews. And George Guthrie tells the story of Antiochus. Of course, it's not a real story. He made up that story to illustrate what happened to the first Christian. Antiochus was just like every other Jewish person living in Rome. They loved the beautiful city, and at the same time, they loved the Jewish tradition. They loved the Jewish festivals, because at the Jewish festivals, there's a lot of food, a lot of singing, and a lot of dancing. If you love good food, if you love good singing, we Seventh-day Adventists, we don't do the dancing part. So go to Jewish festivals. It's really good food. And so Antiochus loved those things. He had a trade. He wanted to become a tailor. And he knew that as a tailor, he will get his life quite easily. But then he heard about Jesus. Another Jewish person like him, who came, who took the title Son of God. And he thought, that's amazing, because the title Son of God is only reserved to the emperor. But now Jesus dares taking the title Son of God, and he starts dreaming. Then he hears again that that Son of God also uses the title Son of Man. So he takes the title of the emperor, but also declares himself to be the Messiah. He's now feeling the joy of every Jewish person. Is that person the Messiah? He hears the story of how he healed people, he fed people, he caused the blind to see, and then heard that he was crucified, but then rose again. And when he heard that Jesus rose again, he investigated and realized Jesus did rise, because there are eyewitnesses that have seen Jesus rising. And he started his journey in believing in this Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, the Son of God, because he knew that Jesus promised that he will return again. There, in the beautiful city of Rome, he lived, with a beautiful Roman forum dedicated to the Roman gods and conquerors. There he stood, knowing that all will be burned one day, but that his faith will take him to heaven. Unfortunately for Antiochus, days passed by. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Years became decades. And Jesus still didn't come back. Now from a life of hope, he was living a life of poverty. Because Christians in Rome were derided. Christians in Rome couldn't participate in the social life. Christians in Rome could hardly get a proper job. And so now, in abject poverty, he looked back at his life as a Jew and wondered if he could go back to that life. After all, the Jewish festivals, the good food, the great singing and dancing still appealed to him. Being able to go and meet his mates at the synagogue would be a joy for him. And he asked himself, should I still keep on believing in Christ Jesus, or should I turn back and go and believe in my Jewish ancestral traditions again? In that moment of discouragement, in that time of rethinking his faith, he heard that a book has arrived and that book will be read at a special house church. Struggling within himself, he decided to take all of his courage and went to the house church. After the members warmly greeting him, they all sat down and somebody puffing came with the book of Hebrews. He was running from another house church where they just read the book of Hebrews. And as the book was opened, Antonicus hears those words. Okay. Long ago, at many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purifications for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become more superior to angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. To us reading it in English, those words are wonderful words. To us reading it in English, these words grab us, because who writes like that? You would hear the story, once upon a time there was, or the beautiful story that you told, but here the book of Hebrews starts and says, long ago, at many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Your pastor tells me that in the congregation as we preach, some of you are reading in the Greek Bible. If you're reading in the Greek Bible this morning, you immediately see that those words in Greek are even more gripping and even more beautiful. If there is a volunteer, and we do have roving mics, and you would like to read it in Greek, please do so. Is there any volunteer that would like to read that, just the first verse in Greek? Let me put it up, and I've transliterated what it says. It says, Polumeros kai polutropos palai othios lelasai tois patresin en tois prophetais, means nothing to us, but to him, Antonikos. Immediately he sees the alliteration, and the alliteration with the letter P grabs him, and he knows that what follows is now going to be interesting. What follows is that God speaks. He spoke through the prophets, but now he speaks. Yes? Thank you. Now he speaks through his Son. So all along, God is the approachable God, because God seeks a way to speak. He is not the God who is aloof. He is not the God that is far away. He is not a God that is the untouchable God. What if God was one of us? Well, he is one of us. Jesus came to be Emmanuel because Jesus is the God that speaks to us. And every time Jesus did something while he was on earth, while he forgave the woman who was caught in adultery, it was God speaking. When to the woman who was anointing him, he says, her story will be told in the whole world in memory of her. It was God speaking. When he says, take your bed and walk, it was God speaking. God speaks through the Son. Let me assure you that every time I open the Gospels, every time I read a story of Jesus, Jesus, the Son, is still speaking to me. So he is an approachable God because God is still speaking today. The wonderful thing about the book of Hebrews is that straight after that, the author cannot contain himself. He breaks out into singing. And I thank you for the opportunity of singing so well this morning. He breaks out into singing and says, who is this Jesus? He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. He upholds the universe by the word of his power. So he ends up singing, praising God. Because right now, right here, today, as we are seated here, our God speaks to us. Who is that Son who speaks? The Son who speaks, is also seated. Oh, sorry. Now it works. Okay, next one. The Son who speaks is also seated at the right hand of the majesty of God. Like Elio, I come from a small country, a very small country. If you drive from Kurrangbong to Sydney, you've gone past the south to the north of my country. You're already in the sea. You come from a small country. In a small country that we come from, politics is our national sports. Okay? Small country, small things. Every small thing becomes a big thing, you know. Politics becomes a national sport. And we always like to know what's the Prime Minister saying, what's the leader of the opposition saying, what's this guy saying, what that guy saying. And I do not escape that. I'm also like that, you know. I don't know what about you, Elio, you know. We don't escape that. We read the newspaper to see what somebody has said. One day, the speechwriter of a prime minister came and asked me to do his wedding. We became friends. And because he asked me to do his wedding, I could ask him, what did he say when such and such thing happened? What did he say when that little thing happened? What did he say when everyone was a little bit angry? And because he's been next to the Prime Minister, he can tell me with great certitude what the Prime Minister was saying. Today, each and every one of us, if we want to know the heart of God, we have the Son seated at the right hand of God who speaks to us. Our God is an approachable God. Our approachable God is also one, help me with the PowerPoint, who is made perfect through suffering. The seated Son is now made perfect through suffering. Again, I'm going to take an example coming from my childhood. My father always had a makeshift tool. So we wouldn't have a star screwdriver at home because for some reason Dad thought that a knife was a good star screwdriver. And since the age of 10, I've been wearing glasses, and at times those screws get loose. And Dad thought that we only had one screwdriver, by the way, at home, just one. He didn't think we needed more screwdrivers because he could use a knife to get into this and fix it. I hated that. I hated that when people would come home and he would need to screw the little thing inside, he would use a knife. It's like, who even are we? You know? What kind of a people are we, you know? Like, are we the kind of people that can't have star screwdrivers? We only have one screwdriver at home? And then one day, when I started earning money, my first purchase was proper screwdriver to fix my glasses. And when I put it in, oh, what a joy! It fitted perfectly. The word perfect here means that through suffering, Jesus fits perfectly to give us salvation. So our approachable God is seated at the right hand of God, and He is perfect for our salvation. He is perfect for our salvation because He is the founder. Now, if you read different Bibles, you will find that the word founder means different things. For example, the NIV translate the word founder as being the pioneer. Give me the next one, please. Okay, the word founder is translated by the NIV as the pioneer. The ESV uses the word founder. The King James uses the word captain. The NASB says originator. Holtman says the source. What is the meaning of that word founder? Archegos. The meaning of that word founder is simple. He is the one that goes before. He is the trailblazer. One day while I was still working in Victoria, we decided while there was ministers' meeting to go climb a mountain. We felt affirmed in doing that and not listening to the speaker on the day when we saw that even the conference president came with us to climb the mountain. But then we thought to ourselves, once we climbed, that it is time for us to go back. And not to be rude, we have to be back in time to listen to the speaker for the evening meeting. We said, what do? We can't go back the way we went. And we decided to go bush bashing. The worst thing ever. That's the worst thing ever, going bush bashing. And there, I don't know if you know him, there's a minister called Matthew Hunter. You know Matthew? 6'4", built like a brick. You know, I thought to myself, the only chance I have, me 5'8", I'm going to stand behind and walk behind Matthew Hunter. Matthew Hunter had a machete in his hands, and he was going bang, 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 going right through the bush. I just stood behind Matthew Hunter. Matthew Hunter on the day was a trailblazer. And because I was behind him, I was able to get to where I wanted to be with no problems. Jesus in this text is a trailblazer for our salvation. So the seated Son spearheads the salvation through his suffering. Salvation is obtained only through Jesus. You know, when I was young, I was told that I have to stand alone in front of God. When I read the book of Hebrews, I realized I don't have to stand alone, because the one who is seated at the right hand of God and spearheads the salvation through his suffering calls you and I siblings. My brother sits at the right hand of God. Your brother sits at the right hand of God, and he invites us to come in. Our time is going very quickly. And so I just want you to put Tim Keller's quote. Tim Keller's quote. Yeah, let's go forward to Tim Keller's quote. Tim Keller says, the only person who dares wake up a king at 3 o'clock for a glass of water is a child. The book of Hebrews tells us that we have access because you and I are children of God. And seated at the right hand of God is our brother. This brother, as the book of Hebrews says, serves in a better sanctuary, is a better sacrifice, and is a better high priest. But as we come to a close, there are also 5 warnings in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 1 to 4 says, do not drift away. A boat without an anchor drifts away. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7 to 4, verse 13 says, do not harden your heart like the wilderness generation. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 11 to 6, verse 12 says, do not fall away. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19 to 39 says, don't keep on sinning deliberately. And Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 29 says, do not become like Esau. You see, the slight discouragement makes us drift away. If we drift away, soon we will have our hearts hardened. If our hearts are hardened, we will fall away. and will keep on sinning deliberately, and ultimately become like Esau, not appreciate the gift of God. The gift of God is indeed that he sits at the right hand of God in the heavenly sanctuary, because you are doing a series in the heavenly sanctuary. He sits at the right hand of God in the heavenly sanctuary and is not ashamed to call us sibling. As the clock hits 12 o'clock, let me conclude by saying that since the seated Son speaks and calls me sibling, since the seated Son spearheads salvation through suffering, since the seated Son serves in a better sanctuary, being a better sacrifice for sin, let us all here stand fast and sustain our faith, hope, and confession. God bless you all.